A very good morning and welcome to day 3 of what has been a fascinating, engaging and really inspirational Co-Create Design Festival. My name is Melane, and of course my pleasure to once again be here. We started on Monday reflecting on the state of the economy in South Africa and where jobs particularly can be created, especially for that all-important market of young people who continue to be the most unemployed in this country. Yesterday, the focus was very much on health and how we can learn from the innovation, the technology that the COVID-19 pandemic trusted upon us and how we can improve and create an inclusive healthcare system for South Africa. Today's focus is going to be on food. We probably one of the countries in the world with the highest and scariest sense of food insecurity. It's the most bizarre thing where aspects of this country, city that we're in, which is Cape Town, there are places where we're throwing away food because we're not consuming it enough, right? You buy a punnet of fruit and you eat one or two and then you forget about it, and then 2-3 weeks later you realize, oh my word, that is spoiled. Where does that go? Into the waste paper basket. If you go to restaurants, to retailers, a lot of food through the process, unfortunately, is going to be wasted. And my favorite story I like sharing all the time, a community like Philippi, where on the one side of the main highway, probably the most productive arable land that you'll find in Cape Town, producing fruits and vegetables, not only for this market, for international market as well. You cross the highway, one of the most poor communities that you'll find, where 9 out of 10 days, families and households don't know where their food is gonna come from. Not what they're gonna have for supper, because there are options in the cupboard. There is nothing in the cupboard, there is nothing in the refrigerator. And that needs to be corrected. Where are the pitfalls, the shortcomings in the value chain? How do we stem those? How do we literally plug those points so that we address the issue of food security in this country? Those are some of the questions that we hope to stimulate some conversation around and hopefully bring about some answers. We hope you're going to stay with us for the duration of the 2 hours. We ask you to please use the hashtag Co-Create Design Festival, so that we can engage with you on social media. Obviously, if you're watching this from the comfort of your home or your office, please do use the chat function to pose any questions to our esteemed guests who will be taking us on a wonderful and provocative journey around some of the questions we need to be asking on food. My guests this morning will include Andrew Boraine, who's the CEO of the Western Cape Economic Development Partnership, and we'll be asking the important question: why is there no food department? There's no ministry of it. There's no MACO member of it in any of the local government spheres. Province does not have a dedicated office dealing with the issue of food. Why not? Is it a good idea to have one in South Africa? Petrina Pakoe is the Community Development Practitioner, Passion for Children and Social Justice, and Director of the Peninsula School Feeding Association that has been feeding children across schools in the Western Cape for many, many years now. And what was sad to note in the pandemic of COVID-19 is that millions of children who are reliant on the nutrition they get from schools were not having access to it anymore because schools were closed. And you'll remember, of course, the High Court ruling that instructed schools to open up in order for the nutrition to be received by those children on a daily basis. So we'll talk about the importance of nutrition, particularly in the early formative years of a child. Karin Kleinbooi is with Solidaridad, that's the name, Solidaridad SA, which is a civil society organization that works throughout the whole supply chain to make sustainability the norm and to enable farmers and workers to earn a decent income. And she'll be answering the question of how we strengthen the rural-urban food nexus to meet the increasing demand and food security, as many more of us are moving to urban areas such as the city of Cape Town. But we start this morning with a lady who is an agri-economist, the Southern Africa country manager at Mission Produce, the world leader in sourcing, producing and distributing avocados. She joins me on the couch, Lindie Stroebel. Lindie, lovely to have you here.
Thank you very much.
You're going to need to have your microphone now.
I have it ready. Thank you very much. Sorry about that.
Not at all. You'll be talking, of course, to the notion of identifying the waste areas within the production and supply chain, and hopefully how we start the process of solving this particular issue.
Absolutely. So thank you for having me, and thank you for the opportunity to share a little bit more about food waste and where the problem is. As you've mentioned, my day job is more in the export industry. I'm an ag economist of background, but my passion still always pulls back to the policy environment, the bigger picture. And that's what I want to also today highlight for us here. When we talk of a food system, when we talk of food waste, the bigger picture. You've mentioned, and it's very much almost the complexity of the problem, we only look at the area that we're exposed to. So we look at the plate that we see, the food that we see getting wasted, but there's a much bigger picture going on here. So my focus will be pretty much on that. And with that, I've got a couple of slides. First of all, like I mentioned here, I'll be talking in the sense of access to food security, the theme for today, waste not, want not. So food security, understand here, we tend to be thinking, is there enough food for all of us? It's a much broader question than what we see there. Food security is equal access to food, affordability, to get the right food. You can't just have food that's not nutritional and allowing you to have an active and healthy lifestyle. It's much broader, but that's more the topic of some of my colleagues today. But it does still come back to what we lose when we waste food. So that's the importance of it. When we talk food waste, like I say there, what really is the problem we're addressing, especially for you finding solutions, you're solution-oriented, where you need to pinpoint what exactly is the problem with food waste. Now, food waste, what is the problem, where is the problem, and who is the problem is the sub-questions we need to ask when we say food waste is a problem. This is not a problem. This is adorable. And this is important because kids need to have this freedom to investigate. And I think even in poorest families, you have pictures like this of kids waste. This is not the problem. This is the problem. When we look at a plate, the plate that gets wasted, about a third of all food on our plates get wasted. 44% of those food being wasted is fresh food and fruit and vegetables in the end of the day. So the problem here, defining food waste, is important. Food waste is any food and edible parts of food removed from the food supply chain, important, supply chain, not just the plate, the supply chain, to be recovered or disposed of. And this is the broader sense of what we say, what we lose, what we're wasting on. This is 6 pictures depicting the essence of what we lose. First of all, nutrients. That kid, there's a lot of food, that third of your plate that goes to waste could have been eaten by somebody who does not have access to that nutrition. The energy, that picture there with the wind farm, there's also tractors using fuel. There's a lot of energy that goes into agricultural production. Labor, at that furthest picture. Labor are being applied to produce our food. It's wasted if we waste those food. Down there, productivity in the value chain. The water. Agriculture, it's a common understanding of how much water use, water waste goes into agriculture, and the importance of optimally utilizing the water in our system. And then, from my end of being in business, the value that's being wasted. You can go on here. 10% of all emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, comes from food waste. This is the bigger definition of food waste and the area that you should look into to find solutions. Now, COVID, to bring it to our overall theme of your program, was, in my view, a paint stripper. It exposed real problems in the world, and it especially exposed the inequality that we find in the world. And that also draws me to the food waste problem to define what problems we have where. This is the per capita food waste in the different parts of the world. And you'll see here, Europe, North America, is much more than typically sub-Saharan Africa or South and Southeast Asia. But look at the breakdown of where the waste is. You have there the simple breakdown of from consumer, and that's what I referred to earlier, the waste in your household. The amount that you bring into your house and how much is actually wasted of what that plate, that third of the plate that we're talking about. And then the waste up until before the consumer buys it. So that's the production and distribution and retailing level. So the split is quite different. In sub-Saharan Africa, it's a very small percentage that's really wasted at household level. The big problem is throughout the rest of the supply chain, whereas Europe and North America really have a big task ahead of them to solve the food plate and household waste. They still have very similar levels of us percentage-wise as well on the production, retailing, and distribution, but their biggest problem to be solved is at household compared to where we will focus typically. So in South Africa, what does it look like? And this is the breakdown, and the work here is done specifically to see where the waste in the different parts of the value chain is. So if you look there, fruits and vegetables stands out as the biggest area of waste for us in South Africa. And that piece there shows you the blue line is the agricultural production, followed by the post-harvest handling and storage, followed by the green blocks there is processing and packaging, then distribution, and then only the consumption part, the food plate part. So you will see there our biggest waste comes from in fruits and vegetables at processing, packaging, and distribution. Interestingly, not necessarily because of the practices there, not necessarily because of the problems that they can't solve there, but because of the requirements by the consumer end. The waste is less there because they know the consumer won't take those products. Here's an interesting point to put out there. We use in the avocado industry a product called Prochlorase that the avocados get dipped in to prevent especially stem molds that can occur and will reduce the shelf life of the product going forward. We have to use it, otherwise we have much more waste at that level. So we've got another year that chemical is allowed to be used because of consumer requirements and pressure by retail. It is good, but the question here is not what are we going to do to reduce waste. The question here for us is how are we going to find an alternative to that particular chemical use? So again, back to my original question, what is really the problem? The problem here is finding an alternative to chemical use, because if we don't find an alternative, our food waste will be significantly higher. At this stage, the losses at post-harvest handling, processing, and distribution is because of the requirements by consumers that those products get wasted there instead of reaching the consumer. In South Africa, specifically in some of our formal chains, we've really found alternatives to some of the products. And I'll get back to that now. Just to put it in, and briefly put it in context for you, the volumes that we're talking about 31 million tons of food ends up in the system. You can see there's about 5 million tons that's being imported, 21 million tons that's actually being consumed there, and then 27% of this food gets wasted. That adds about to 10 million tons of food a year that gets wasted. And you can see the breakdown there. I want to get to the solution part, so I'm not going to spend too much time there, but it shows you in value terms how much we actually waste in this process. So recent work that we did for the Dutch Embassy, we put this graph or figure together to explain to you the 3 channels in South Africa and to break it down on what can be done in terms of addressing food waste. The top there is a formal market in terms of exports. It's really equivalent to any market and chain that you'll find anywhere in the world. South Africa is really up there, but our biggest problem there is still the waste at consumer level. We go all the way to understand what to do with waste products. If the product is not ready for export, we have, and I'll get to that, we have an informal market, which is a very good market and uptake market options for our products. And also products that really can't get to the market. In my exposure of the avocado industry, avocado oil takes all our throw-out products. We really have very little ending at landfill or in composting. So the formal market, especially in the export industry, is really geared for that. Our problem is in the previous graph, if you look at our European market, our problem is then the waste at retail or consumer level. The formal market locally, of the food wasted, 50% of those is at the production and post-harvest handling. 45% of those waste is at the process and packaging, very much to the reasons I explained earlier. And then only 5% of our formal market, the waste is at our formal market, the consumption level beyond retail. It's really not our biggest problem in South Africa. The informal market is a gem we have in South Africa that we need to treasure. I understand part of the program is also some exposure to the Cape Town market. I want to applaud you for that intention of going there. The fresh produce markets that we have in South Africa is very unique. There's some forms of wholesale markets in the world, but the commission system that we have here opens up market options. Firstly, on the grower side. If I would grow a small patch of spinach, I can actually take that. I won't get the prices of the perfectly packaged and all of that of the some more formal growers, but I still have a place to sell that. And that's the one side of it. The other most beautiful part of this market access and market options that's being allowed of this is the access for even the smallest spaza shop owner to obtain produce. Now, I always use carrots as an example. If you go to our formal and I'd say top-end retailers, you have this perfectly sized carrots, you know, exactly the same size, same thickness, everything in the same bag. The one is smaller, the one is bigger. You get exactly what you're looking for. What about the more thicker carrot or the bigger one? You know, are they all ending up in juices? Not necessarily. If you're a smaller grower, you don't have that sort of quantity. You don't even have access to juicing that. In a typical environment of the north or the western world, they'll just plow it back into the soil. We don't need to. We have a market offtake for it because of the fresh produce system. I once in a market in Mozambique, I spotted one of our biggest growers' carrots there, and I WhatsApped him and I sent him a picture. I said, "This is the ugliest carrots I've seen ever, but it's the most beautiful thing." Because there's a market for it. There's nothing wrong with it, you know, you can't sell rotten carrots, but it's bigger, it's oddly sized, there's a market for it. And that's the beauty of such market options, because you have less waste than you would have typically in the Western world. The Joburg market does about 2 million tons of fresh produce a year. They've got 1% waste. 1%. That's amazing because of this system that we have, and we really have to treasure it. So to move forward, there's a list. I've touched on some of it. It's basically summarizing what I'm talking about. First of all, there are varieties, machinery, production technology. If we have the right innovation, the right solutions to it, there's a lot of difference that can be made in terms of food waste. We produce what is necessary, not necessarily what can be grown here. So looking into that's important. Temperature control and early cooling sounds easy, but it's very complicated, especially if you talk of smaller growers. A lot of waste, and that's why Africa in general is known for a lot of waste on the productions end and the distribution end, because we don't have good cooling, and it leads to the next point there, cold chain and logistics solutions. More solutions needs to be found in that space. There's a lot of work, especially there's the Flying Swans initiative supported by the Dutch Embassy as well. that is solution-driven towards that problem of maintaining the cold chain and the logistic solutions. And it especially speaks for international freight as well. And then the balance between the requirements by consumers and what is possible on ground level. You know, I've mentioned the example of prochlorase. It's not even, it stays on the outer ends of the product. It doesn't go into the flesh of what the consumer actually consumes at the end of the day. The pressure sometimes is unnecessarily on that chemicals because there's a space for it in the world of food waste. If we allow a little bit more of that, or we find alternatives to chemicals, we won't run into the food waste problems because there's a point to be discussed about that. So what's the balance? It's an open question to be considered. And then, of course, supply chain to market efficiency is very important. If you don't know your supply chain, you don't know your market, you will end up with too much volume on the market at certain times and too little at other times. Knowing that supply chain and getting more efficient solutions to it. Market options, I went into it earlier about the gem that we have here of diverse market options, diverse channels. There's a huge argument of trying to get that into the rest of the world as well to reduce the waste at that end. Again, where's the problem? There. What's the solution to it? That is a possible solution to it. Processing unavoidable waste. There's a lot that can be done. I think the juicing industry has done us a lot of favor into odd sizes and all of that. And you can't take fruit that can't be consumed anymore to the juicing level. And then also composting. There's more to be discussed about that later. And then food rescues. I want to applaud, and it's one of the solutions that our retail industry in South Africa is looking into, making sure we rescue the food that is still edible but didn't end up being sold or consumed. Just a few graphic explanations. There's the food recovery hierarchy. The end of the day, the least should end up in landfill. There's process there. I don't want to spend too much time. That half plate's being thrown out. That's education. We spoke about it earlier about our kids. If it's almost like the starfish example of if you can make a difference in one starfish's life, if you can educate one kid, you've got a more aware society going forward about less food waste. And then that graph at the end it's an explanation of the Consumer Goods Council of South Africa working with retailers that committed to reduce their food waste in the next, I think it's 15 years that's still remaining on the program to reduce the food waste by half. Like I explained earlier, that's not our biggest concerns in terms of value and amount of food waste, but everybody is committing to do something. So there is programs in place, and I applaud every little bit of solutions that's in place already. But that's from me, and I hope everybody got some idea and some thinking, and this creating solutions, a fantastic opportunity. And here's a few foods for thought, literally, excuse the pun, to go with, and I hope you can help us in finding solutions.
Well, the pun is absolutely intended, without a doubt. A couple of questions, Lindie. The retailers, it's good to hear that they have committed to reducing food waste, and I'm hoping the intention is being realized, right? Should we, in South Africa, start introducing, I don't know, punitive measures to hold those retailers to account? Because I immediately think that if we are wasting the significant amount of food through the sort of farm to retailer process, that's a design system that you can put in there to literally eliminate that. And if they're not, then, you know, pay an extra tax kind of thing, surely. I mean, or am I just being too much of a horrible president?
You're very strict. You're being very strict on them, it is true, but rightfully so. We need to take, everybody needs to take responsibility for this problem. Sometimes finding a solution and telling that you're going to reduce the problem, as I explained there on one of the slides, is there's more reason for your intention. They've got more to lose if they don't address this problem. The cost of doing something with your waste is adding to your business cost. So retailers not only want to do the right thing, they don't only want to make sure we get the food that is still edible but past the date, or there's some reason it's not being sold, get it to a food rescue or get it to composting, or just reduce waste in general. But also that's going to reduce their cost burden of getting rid of the product. So that's an important thing to see as well. So the cost is keeping them responsible as well. But us as consumers, it is important. We need to follow up because we've got a part to play in this as well. So the general public, right through to a taxation, could be applied on this. But that's very complicated to roll out.
Because the other problem I have is that as a person who lives on his own, trying to go out and find 1 unit of something is an impossibility. And when you do find it, the packaging and the plastic waste that comes with that is another conversation altogether. And then when I'm looking for organic vegetables and fruit, I'm paying a premium for that ugly carrot. You know what I mean? It's not perfectly sized, but the taste is better. I'm mindful of the fact that it's come within a particular radius of where I live or where I'm buying it, and I'm paying a premium for that. That almost is counterintuitive, isn't it?
The cost that it's reflected in the premium that you pay for it, comes to all the accreditation processes, everything to be able to say this is an organic product. It's not necessarily the reduced price because it's an oddly looking product. Because it's oddly looking, it's not necessarily because it's organic. So going through, for a grower, going through the processes, accreditation, ensuring that you're really delivering on the promise of delivering organic product, that adds the cost, not necessarily the production end of it. That's why the demand for localized markets, which can say this product is organic because I say so, not necessarily because I need to comply with all the requirements of the retailing end to really put it on the packaging. That's why that is coming more and more in demand for people to have access to that market, to a farmer's market or a local market, to access that more, like you say, tastier and more nutrition product. So yes, there's a whole argument to say that you pay for the accreditation, not necessarily for the better nutrition.
Which is very unfortunate. Then my last question, I mean, if you close your fist, that's the size of your stomach. And yet if you go to some of the restaurants and you buy a dish, the portion on your plate is extraordinary. No wonder we have tables of half-eaten food, because there's just so much in there. The number of times I've gone into a restaurant, ordered a dish, and I said, can I please have half of what you usually put in a plate? It's how do we get them to turn around? Because I imagine if you can say for 10 Rand you can get this, and then you get a plate of food that is oversized, you'll have a line of people queuing outside, right? Whereas if you have that size of portion on a plate that size, people are going to go to the neighbor and say, I'd rather go buy there because there's perceived value for money. But when you're leaving more than half of what you've got in your plate to go to the waste bin, because you can't rescue a lot of that food, we need to educate us as consumers, but also the restaurateurs, surely.
Absolutely, you just nailed it there, it's education. And the people that we're learning from is especially the Americans. And their problem is not necessarily the full plates at the restaurant, but the buy one, get one free at the supermarket levels.
Oh, heavens.
They go bulk, and then the whole intention of selling more, buying bulk, etc., led to an extreme spike in food waste, household food waste. Because you buy the bulk, it's cheaper, you think you're scoring, but you throw away half of it because you're not going to eat half of it. And it adds to that whole question of why are we presented with this massive plates of food at a restaurant? You're never going to prepare that sort of massive plate at your home when you prepare a home-cooked meal, but you get that at a restaurant. Why? You know, and so that is part, all of it, to education. Education, and at the end of the day, if we have a more aware population, a more aware consumer base, we're going to demand that this is what I need and this is what I want on the table, and I don't want more than that. And so it's a long-term education solution there.
Lindie, thank you very much. It was certainly food for thought, without a doubt. Those numbers again: a third of all food is wasted, primarily fruits and vegetables, but meat and other products as well. A lot of that happening in the farm to retailer part of the value chain. 10 million tons of food wasted. 10 million tons of food wasted, and that contributes to 10% of gas emissions that we're obviously desperately trying to address. So many important conversations that need to be had there. My grandmother used to tell us, eat your vegetables, there are kids in Ethiopia who are hungry. Our new line is, eat your vegetables, there are kids in Philippi who are hungry, so that it's a lot closer to home and you have a better appreciation of that. Now, we are living in a world where urbanization is a reality, right? Up to 70% of our population in South Africa will be living in urban centers in the near future, and there's a big question then to be asked, how we strengthen that rural-urban food nexus to meet the increasing demand as well as food security. And the person who's going to help us answer that question and joining us via the platform is Karin Kleinbooi, who is the Senior Program Manager at Solidaridad SA, which is a civil society organization that works throughout the whole supply chain to make sustainability the norm and, more importantly, enable farmers and workers to earn a decent income. Karin, lovely to have you here. I can't wait for your contribution. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you very much for this invitation. I'm very privileged to be here. I want to just do a short introduction to Solidaridad. So I'm going to share my screen if that is okay. All right. So yeah, the organization is called Solidaridad and it's a Spanish word, but because we have started off our operations and interventions in South America, we are now a global organization that's working in 40 organizations worldwide with 8 regional centers. I'm based at Solidaridad Southern Africa, and we are integrated under Solidaridad East and Central Africa. We work with smallholder farmers and farming communities, as well as a number of actors in the supply and value chain and food chain in 11 global and many local commodities. We are a Solidaridad envision a world in which all we produce and all we consume can sustain us while respecting the planet, each other, and the next generation. Our mission is to make sustainability the norm by ensuring fair value distribution that will enable farmers and workers and their families to earn a living income, influence consumers towards healthy consumptions. Lindie already made some mention of that, and make communities custodians of finite natural resources to bring back our balance with nature and to influence the policy agenda on these topics. Our new strategic pathways is based on the principle of locality. I think we certainly do need a new economy in the same way that in the same vein that we need a new food system that works for all, with a better balance between local economic development and globalization. And this balance we refer to as glocality. So glocality is a better balance between the needs of communities and the forces and opportunities of globalization. So there's the global pathway where we need to decrease inequality in the global sectors, but at a local level, we really need to increase diversity in the rural-urban nexus. Our implementation strategy of our programs is through various intervention levels. We work with farmers and workers at the center. So at the producer level, we focus on good agricultural practices. We at the business level, creating enabling business ecosystems, and at a policy level, we really focus on making that policy environment a bit more enabling. The market value, we focus very strongly on market uptake. So these 4 levels are integrally interconnected, and the overall goal is to build resilient communities through prosperity, balance, and nature, and with inclusive apologies. And inclusivity. We contribute in our work to 4 of the main SDGs: no poverty, zero hunger, decent work, and economic growth. as well as responsible consumption and production. And integral into all our work, we focus on gender equality, reducing inequalities. We are always seeking partnerships for the goals. We focus on climate action, sustainable cities and communities, life on land, clean water and sanitation, as well as peace, justice, and strong institutions. Hopefully, there's now a better understanding of what Solidaridad is. It's solidarity.
There certainly is, Karin, and thank you very much for that. One of the key issues, of course, is the issue of accessibility, right? So how do we ensure that urban households have access to the rural farmers' produce that is hopefully limiting the process of the wastage that we've just spoken of, rather, in the process of going from farmer to retailer?
Yeah, there is a growing recognition that more localized food production can shorten food supply chains. This can make local food available and cheaper because local supply chains are more resilient and less susceptible, for example, to rising costs and disruptions of various natures. We've just seen what happened now during the COVID-19 pandemic when, there were a challenge in moving food from those who produce food to those who needed the food. Many farmers who live in rural areas have difficulty in locally marketing their products. This is due to several factors such as visual quality standards. Lindie mentioned some of those things that is imposed by the market. Better operation of local farmers a better organization of local farmers in rural areas would help in maintaining the supply of agricultural products with greater regularity and diversity. Solidaridad is focusing on improving the production of growing practices of rural farmers, improving their capacities and capabilities in smart farming, so that they can actually enter formal markets. Our focus on food safety and assurances is allowing rural farmers entry into those markets. We have been very instrumental in creating local food safety standards, such as MOSBOPA. It's a local good agricultural practice that is now considered by the Mozambican government as a regulation. For these Mozambican small farmers, that creates opportunities for them to supply markets in urban areas. In South Africa, we have built the capacity of smaller farmers, including many growers, on very small plots. And in South Africa, we have a lot of subsistent farmers. They are not able to supply formal markets and mainly operate in a very informal setup. But we have managed with this program entitled Smallholders Market Access to Higher Value Markets that was funded by the European Union to build the capacity of these farmers to supply and secure markets with major retailers. And these retailers include Pick n Pay, Yukon, Food Lovers Market, and Eucharist, for example. We also engage with multi-stakeholders and actors, including the private sector, our market players, government, and local communities to ensure market linkages for rural farmers and advocate for food that is both produced and consumed locally in cities and in the suburbs of cities to provide families with a more affordable alternative that can improve for example, their diets, supplementing the income if they are able to sell some of the surplus food that they've grown. However, there's a major obstacle in localization. And I think we've been talking about this over the last year and a half now via various forums. But this obstacle to localization is the lack of economic distribution of food. We are now focusing on food aggregation, try to see how can we scale up the aggregation of local foods and distribute that food. from the rural or the peri-urban areas into the urban centers. One of our focus areas in terms of implementation is establishing local food hubs as an important tool for enterprises that provides customized services to rural farmers, pooling products from a number of small-scale farmers and delivering them to retailers, to schools, to hospitals and restaurants. So our focus now is establishing alternative food networks to connect rural farmers with different participants in the local food chain and then getting their produce to urban centers.
Let me ask this then as a follow-up question and a parting question for the moment, but of course you'll be staying with us until 12. It's important for us to have sufficient nutrition, right, in every plate of food that we feed ourselves, our families, our community, but at the same time, there's a sensitivity around price. How does Solidaridad help in ensuring access to good nutrition at a price that is acceptable for most?
Well, this is really, it is a problem because that is what's keeping our farmers out of the market. What we are trying to do is now to customize our services to local farmers or to smallholder farmers so that they are able to produce a product of quality, a better quality. We also support them with negotiating a fair price on their product. And as I mentioned earlier, smallholder farmers as individuals are really they're insignificant in the market and they're not able to negotiate. So we are really working very hard to build the capacity of farmers to improve the product that they produce. We also make sure that they understand how the market works, how to negotiate for their prices. And with these local hubs now as aggregator hubs, we are actually able to get better prices for the products that they produce.
Karin, thank you very much. Karin Kleinbooi, Senior Program Manager at Solidaridad Southern Africa, joining us, of course, until the conclusion of this On the Couch section. The Peninsula School Feeding Association has been in existence for many, many years, and an important association given the number of kids across the peninsula that it impacts on, and this was obviously made that much more urgent and important when COVID-19 and the pandemic forced the closure of schools. And for the first time in a long time, we had all these kids who were dependent on the 2 nutritious meals they would get every day from their school, not having access to it. That resulted in, certainly in the Western Cape Department of Education, opening up their schools. And to think that there were political parties and trade unions who were opposed to this, unbelievable. But other provinces had to wait until an instruction from a high court for them to do so in order to provide the nutrition to the children. So Petrina, this last 18 months, I suppose, has really highlighted the importance of the work that you do.
Yes, it has, and it's been a difficult couple of months, but we've survived. And for those that don't know, first of all, thank you very much for the opportunity to be here this morning. It's indeed an honor for me to be here. But to give you some more background about the organization and what we do, Peninsula School Feeding Association is a non-profit organization that has been in existence for the past 62 years feeding in schools. We address the needs of hunger in our young learners in primary schools, secondary schools, special needs schools, ECDs, your early childhood development centers, orphan and vulnerable centers, and also then in TVET colleges. We operate, as you indicated, predominantly within the Western Cape, providing 2 nutritious cooked meals for learners at a cost of R2.75. Our motto as an organization is that you cannot teach a hungry child. Our main aims are to reduce short-term hunger, increase the attendance at school and reduce absenteeism, enhance the ability to learn, build immune systems, increase energy resulting in improved concentration in the classroom, reduce the learner dropout rate within our schools, improve the nutritional status of learners by addressing the macronutrients and micronutrients deficiencies, poverty alleviation by providing peace of mind to parents who are unable to afford to provide their children with nutritious meals while at home, but also community empowerment and income generation by providing our volunteer food preparers with training and a monthly honorarium. So at the time of going into lockdown, Peninsula School Feeding Association was providing 2 to 3 cooked meals at 859 learning institutions, benefiting approximately 334,000 learners and serving 624,575 meals daily.
Sure.
This was made possible through our partnerships with provincial and local government, learning institutions, and the support of our very, very generous donors. So we are one of 3 service providers to the Western Cape National School Nutrition Program, known to many as the NSNP. The program, the NSNP as such, provides 1 nutritious meal to all learners in poorer primary and secondary schools, and within the Western Cape, they do 2 meals. The program was established in 1994 by the then newly elected democratic government, who initially established the primary school nutrition program, which later was renamed the National School Nutrition Program. And the NSNP feeds over 9 million children across the country. And within the Western Cape, it operates in 1,010 schools and feeds about 1 million learners. So nutrition for children is based on some core principles, as nutrition for adults is. The key to proper nutrition is a healthy and appropriate balance of diet and exercise, as well as an active lifestyle. The 5 main food groups include your grains, your dairy, protein, vegetables, and fruit, and are generally a good starting point for any child's diet. The portions of each respective food group depends heavily on age, genetic makeup, and your physical activity. Nutrients are substances needed for growth, energy provision, and other body functions. Macronutrients are those nutrients required in larger amounts that provide energy needed to maintain body function and carry out your daily activities. Carbohydrates, fats, and proteins are your macronutrients. Your micronutrients are needed in smaller quantities. They include vitamins and minerals. Vitamins are necessary for energy production, immune function, blood clotting, and other things. Minerals play an important role in growth, bone health, fluid balance, and other processes. So South Africa has 19.7 million children under 18 years old, making up 34% of the population. 1 in 5 children are hungry and rely on school meals. South Africa is faced with a double burden of both overnutrition and undernutrition. So 1 in 4 children under 5 years old are stunted, and 1 in 8 young children are overweight or obese. 2.5% of South Africans' children are wasted. This is a sign of severe weight loss, which can be caused by inadequate dietary intake or infections such as diarrhea. Wasting can be a life-threatening disease, and in 2018, nearly 50% of child deaths in hospitals were associated with moderate and severe acute malnutrition.
Wow.
A high proportion of children are deficient in micronutrients such as vitamin A, zinc, iron, and iodine that are essential for cognitive development and a healthy immune system. 13.3% of young children are overweight or obese. This is more than double the global average. So Rob Nixon refers to malnutrition as a slow violence that occurs gradually and out of sight, a violence of delayed destruction that is dispersed across time and space. We are often not aware of the problem until the child's health and development is seriously compromised. It stunts children's physical growth and cognitive development, undermines their health, education, and employment prospects, and increases their risk of developing chronic diseases. In 2020, in the Child Gauge report, it encourages us to understand child nutrition in context, as it looks beyond individual behavior to identify the systemic and structural drivers of malnutrition. For example, the way in which individual food choices are constrained by the local food environment, with many children living in communities where healthy foods are not available and local markets are flooded with cheap ultra-processed foods, low in nutrients, high in sugar, salt, and fat, and which are fueling a rapid rise in obesity and chronic diseases. Therefore, it's not surprising that 29% of children are developmentally on track, or that malnutrition continues to be a key driver of under 5 mortalities in South Africa, with 1 in 2 hospital deaths associated with moderate or severe malnutrition, as I indicated earlier. Hence, there has been a big support for the First 1,000 Days campaign. A child's health is most vulnerable during the first 1,000 days of its life, which is the period from conception until their second birthday. This is when a child's brain begins to grow and develop, and when the foundations of their lifelong health are built. It is therefore essential to intervene early by, for pregnant women, maintaining weight gain during pregnancy, dietary counseling for the pregnant mom, and micronutrient supplementation. For the infants, exclusive breastfeeding during the first 6 months is really crucial where possible. Growth monitoring and nutrition counseling, the treatment of severe malnutrition, the provision of vitamin A supplements, deworming is crucial, as is the importance of immunization, but then also having access to primary healthcare facilities, parent education and support, and the accessibility to early childhood development centers. So the onset of COVID-19, as we've all heard, has exacerbated the problems of not just undernutrition and overnutrition, but also nutrient deficiency. 27% of children of South Africa were already stunted pre the pandemic. So the disruption of school feeding programs, child nutrition services, routine immunization and vaccination services, breastfeeding support, and many other support services by the onset of COVID-19 risk the undoing of years of progress in securing children's health and nutrition in our country. So knowing what we know, the question is, what can we do to lessen the impact? Ways we can change things, and this is in my opinion, is to tailor programs to address children's specific nutritional needs at each stage of a child's life. PSFA understands the importance of the first 1,000 days and have developed over the past 5 years specific menus for children under 3 years, including 4 to 5 meals. We have collaborated with ECD organizations and primary healthcare facilities in developing an holistic approach to ECD support. There needs to be a promotion on the rollout of the nutrition guidelines of ECD centers. This provides practical guidelines on how to feed babies and young children, including menus, a shopping list, food safety, and how to promote early eating, or healthy eating as such. Training of ECD practitioners on the National Curriculum Framework for Birth to 4. This includes development guidelines for babies and toddlers and young children, age-appropriate learning activities, and a broad spectrum or assessment framework on how to identify children at risk of over and undernutrition. Nutrition, health, and well-being is also a specialized subject that should be included in the education and training of early childhood development practitioners. There needs to be access for all children to the school nutrition program. The quintile system that we have in place sees many learners falling between the gaps and not having access to feeding at schools always. The existing menu of the NSNP has been in place for the past 13 years. There needs to be an evaluation of the menu to increase the nutrients that is within that particular menu. While school gardens are part of the NSNP program, not all schools participate in this. So increased vegetables could supplement the existing menu if it is planted at schools. Tracking food over and above what is provided by ECD subsidies and the NSNP and what the nutritional value is to those beneficiaries. There needs to be a basic food basket of essential foods that is zero rated or VAT-free, thereby encouraging people to buy healthy at an affordable price. Digital food vouchers have become popular. There should be a way to monitor what food items beneficiaries are spending their vouchers on. We need to be creating apps to monitor the movement of food and gas supplies for food. Monitoring of the health chart from the cradle to the grave, whereby an accessible platform is created which primary health care givers, clinic staff, and all relevant health care providers are able to track the health milestones and development of an individual, thereby being able to pick up early signs of health challenges. There's much more that can also be done from a social and economic point of view. However, I'm going to leave that to the specialists who manage our country's budgets to make recommendations. But in concluding, our President Cyril Ramaphosa wrote in a blog, "Alleviating hunger is not an act of charity. It is an imperative for any society that is founded on respect for human rights. Children's right to basic nutrition is enshrined in Section 28 of the South African Constitution. Government, therefore, has an obligation to address the challenge of hunger and food security affecting our children. We need to put children at the heart of the food system. All children need a balanced diet. To achieve this, we need to make healthy food available, affordable, acceptable, desirable, but most importantly, sustainable." In the words of Gabriela Mistral, who is the Nobel Peace Prize winning poet from Chile, who said, "Many things we need can wait. The child cannot. Now is the time his bones are formed, his mind developed. To him, we cannot say tomorrow. His name is today."
That is so true.
Thank you.
So true. Petrina, firstly, how in heaven's name do you feed a child for R2.75?
Bulk procurement. So yeah, a big part of it is our ability to procure bulk and procuring as locally as possible. And it's not always easy. We try our utmost to support the local farmers. We are situated in Philippi, so the challenge usually is being able to get the tonnages that we require from the local farmers. But because we are able to get the cash funds from our various donors, we are then able to procure and negotiate that price. And also remind our corporates and our suppliers that what we are doing is a matter of justice. And they have a role to play and thereby bringing down the price of their food, or subsidizing that so that we are able to pay it forward and feed the children.
For me, the disheartening thing, I suppose, is a contradiction in the fact that 1 in 4 of our children are stunted,
Yep.
and yet 1 in 8 are overweight. It shouldn't be, surely.
It shouldn't be, but I think a big part has also got to do with education. And, you know, the way that I feed my child and the way that somebody else feeds their child, and also the access to the food that we are feeding them. Especially now during COVID, when we were visiting some of the homes of the children, and you were looking at the plate of food that was being provided. If you only have maize meal, and you are giving your child the porridge in the morning, then the krummel pap in the afternoon, and then you're adding something else to that pap in the evening, that starch eventually leads you to an obese or overweight child. It isn't the most nutritious meal, but it's what fills the child at that time. But long term, it is going to lead you to a child who's going to be malnourished because they didn't get a balanced diet. And that eventually then leads to a child who's going to have colon problems, that eventually then leads to diabetes and those kinds of problems, the chronic diseases at a later stage in life.
It's lovely to learn that 9 million children across the country are being fed through feeding programs that obviously are supported in part by, I suppose, government, but most importantly by generous donors. But that intervention is then at school.
Yeah.
And 2 nutritious meals a day is better than nothing. But if you're going to be going back home to a krummelpap and a smorky of something that is probably made up of things that are highly processed, GMOs, all sorts of things, it does somewhat undo the work you've done during the day, doesn't it?
It does. And therefore, I come back to the importance of educating of the parents as to what that meal needs to look like, what that balanced meal needs to look like.
But that parent is
also,
going to tell you, I've only got 10 rand.
There we go.
Therefore, this is all I can afford. I can't have spinach on my menu. I cannot have sweet potato on my menu because all I can afford is this.
And hence the proposal that we start making healthy foods more affordable, making that basic food basket at a zero-rated price, so that they're not having to pay heavy taxes on those the fish items that they could potentially afford instead of the meat to be putting onto that plate of food. But I can't always fight that battle. It's a bit higher up the chain than where I am at grassroots level. But it's creating that constant awareness and working with that mother during the time of pregnancy, getting her to the clinic where they are able to be educated and the awareness is created, encouraging the food garden at home. I mean, there's so many diverse ways in which we can, at a home level, be doing something towards growing our own herbs, creating our own little garden, to even build, to be having that spinach, even if it's built in a little pot like we have here in front of us, that you are able to add, but it's, you know, helping that parent to think outside of the box, which is not always possible when all you can think about is my own hungry stomach and that of my child.
Yeah, and I suppose limited space, right?
Yes,
Where
yes.
you're living in an informal settlement where the neighbor is right there, so you don't even have enough space necessary to create that patch. You mentioned, of course, the importance of the first 1,000 days, and early childhood development centers play a vital role in that. We do know that we have the plight of having quite a significant number of the centers not registered. Either because the process and the bureaucracy is too cumbersome, or because there's a retired person who has capacity, so therefore all the parents of young children in the neighborhood decide to leave their children with her. She is not going to be thinking, wait a minute, where can I get the nutritious meal that then will require me to buy all these foods and prepare them in this way so that that child is appropriately and nutritiously fed.
And this is why there's this massive drive with the Department of Social Development to not just look at early childhood development centers, but also playgroups and day mothers, and get them coordinated so they are able to collaborate and engage with your local ECD, who is then able to assist. So you're getting programs like African, Inseba Trust, other organizations who are umbrella bodies for ECDs so that they can help to be the voice of these playgroups, of these day mothers, of these ECDs, to be engaging government to help them get to that point of registration, but also to help them to become educated on how they can do things at that micro level, even if they're not registered, but can still do the best for the child who they are assisting.
Petrina, thank you very much. Just a reminder, alleviating hunger is not an act of charity, said the President. Andrew Boraine, CEO of the Western Cape Economic Development Partnership. Government has a constitutionally enshrined obligation to provide food and nutritious food to everyone who is hungry. Do we need a Department of Food?
Africa, it's a very good question. It's not necessarily the right answer, and I'd like to try and elaborate on that. But firstly, can I just say, I really would like to thank Erica and the Craft and Design Institute for putting food and nutrition system as a design challenge, because that really is the right approach. And I would certainly encourage all young designers out there to take on the challenge of how do we transform our food system. So Petrina has, in detail, with great deal of accuracy, defined the problem that we're facing here. And I don't want to repeat what she has said. Just to really say, 1 in 4 children in South Africa are not reaching their cognitive growth potential. That's a national crisis, because the lifelong impacts of stunting, which is locked in by age 2, is absolutely devastating to the individual and to the country as a whole. If you think to the individual's health and to the health system, the individual's learning ability and the education system, the individual's employability and the economic system, and the physiological impact of stunting with regard to sort of impulse control contributes to levels of violence in our country, gender-based violence. So these things are all connected. And I think the point I would make is that, firstly, it's a persistent problem. This is not a new problem. It's been around for 5-6 decades. And if you compare what a country like Brazil has been able to do, that started in the same position as we were 5 decades ago, and where they are now and where we are now, it's quite shocking at how poor we've done as a country. So it is a national issue, it's a national crisis, and it should be treated as such. So what's the problem? So one of the causes that I see for poor performance as a country on this issue is what we can call a systems governance challenge. So firstly, the food and nutrition system is a complex system. You deal with production, and production can be large commercial or small. It could be urban and rural. It could be formal and informal. Processing. Food gets processed. Huge amount of activity around packaging. Then there's distribution and transport and storage. And then there's retail, both formal and informal. There's the impact of marketing and advertising on food choices that people make. There's the Lindie was talking about the management of food waste. You talk about the loss of biodiversity and the negative impact on climate change that the food system has worldwide. And then you've got to throw in the urban systems. If people don't have energy, they can't cook. If they don't have water, they can't cook. If they have poor sanitation, it impacts on the health situation. So this is a complex system. And there is no ministry or department in charge of that whole system. I'm not sure there ever could be, because it deals with, it's so cross-cutting and there's so many facets that one would have to deal with. I think perhaps more significantly, there's no common approach or common understanding of the term food security. If you talk to people in the agricultural sector and the agricultural ministry, they'll say, no, it's all about food production. You know, there's a productionist bias in their interpretation, and it's all about making food available to the country, not necessarily to, you know, poor and vulnerable communities. So South Africa, we've got enough food, you know, and it ends there. If you talk to other people that say, no, food is a food relief issue. You know, it's the Department of Social Development. It's about welfare and crisis and emergencies under COVID. Others will tell you food security is about rural development and inclusion of small-scale farmers. And each one of those is not necessarily wrong, but it's only part of the definition. And we are unable to really bring people together around a common agenda if you're only seeing part of the problem, your part of the elephant, as opposed to the system as a whole. I think we've also got to put on the table that food security and nutrition policy is a heavily contested political and policy space. The economic cluster in our country, from national to local, tends to privilege large-scale agri-industrial production or involvement in the whole food chain in the name of jobs and employment and growth, sort of disregarding the nutritional outcome, the poor nutritional outcomes of that system. The health and nutrition sort of cluster, on the other hand, that is raising the nutrition issues, has zero impact on the economic cluster. So we've got a standoff there. So would this be solved by a Department of Food? Well, apart from, do we need another department when we have perhaps too many, and the fiscal crisis of the state and all those sorts of things. So practically, I don't think it's going to happen. But as I said, the food and nutrition system has so many moving parts that one department couldn't possibly put all those parts from other departments under a department. I'd also make two further points, Africa, is it's not just about what national government does. I think that sub-national government, provinces and municipalities, have a critical role to play. And sometimes the typical response is food is not our problem. It's not our mandate. It's someone else's mandate. So we get sort of creeping mandatism, very legalistic approaches to dealing with the problem. And that you can't take on a system challenge if you start with the mandate. You've got to start with that this is a crisis and everyone must muck in, whether it's your formal mandate or not in government. But unfortunately, regulatory compliance and how that is interpreted can start saying, well, don't work on something that is not your mandate, that's fruitless and wasteful expenditure, and you'll get an unclean audit. So there's kind of those sort of things creep into this thing. And the second point I'd make, it's not just about government. You know, the 6 dimensions of food security as defined, one of them says it's all about agency, it's about people participating in their own food solutions. And so civil society, plus business, plus research and academia have a role to play as much as national, provincial, and local government.
I still want, though, a sense of who is that one person with the authority who's going to issue an instruction to all these various, departments, both public and private, and say, guys, one, nutrition is a priority for this country because we really have to address it. And almost in a similar way as we saw with the pandemic, right? There was an emergency, and all of a sudden everybody was refocused, working together across departments. We were sharing yesterday how the exchange of data and information was so much more readily sort of exercised than was the case previously. We almost need that with food nutrition. And I would argue that that leadership came in part from the president, but certainly from a health minister that was given the authority to make possible the interventions that spread itself out, economics, social welfare, all of that.
Africa, I agree with you 100%. You need a champion, but that someone who convenes all the parts of the system. But that champion cannot be from one sector. If that champion comes from agriculture, they will have an agricultural productivist bias. If they come from health and nutrition, they won't necessarily have influence on the economic cluster. If they come from rural development, they'll ignore the urban system and vice versa. And so I think, in a way, the metaphor of a national ministry or a national department is just that, who convenes the system as a whole? And I was trying to give some thought to this, given the fact that in the short term there's not going to be ministerial and departmental restructuring to support the food and nutrition system. And maybe in the short term what could be done is some sort of national standing commission on food and security with an explicit mandate for a whole of government approach, a transversal approach, and a whole of society approach. So not just one government department leading it, because that has not solved the problem in 5 decades.
No. I suppose speak to that and speak to what is being done currently to improve the food and nutrition system. Because we have to believe that, be it political leadership, be it civil society, be it private corporate South Africa, we're all aware of the problem, and we must intend to solve it, surely.
So, Africa, the good news is that a lot of people are doing a lot of things. Petrina has referred to the work of her organization as part of a much wider network, schools and ECDs. Karin has referred to the work of her organization. And firstly, there's a range. I'm going to start with civil society, because civil society rose to the challenge during COVID, and actually in our calculations provided in the Western Cape, I can't speak for the whole country, 60% of all food relief efforts was provided by civil society and about 40% by government. So government was significant, but without civil society, we would have been in deep, deep trouble as a region. And so there's a range of incredible energy, actions, innovations coming from civil society organizations right now. You know, whether it's the ECD gardens or the school gardens or household gardens or small-scale commercial farming support and things like that. There's food hubs. I'm thinking of what's happening in the Greater Knysna Food Security Forum, what we found out's happening in the Overberg. Worcester and the Breda Valley are doing incredible work around food and nutrition and bringing food ECDs and the nutrition people together, starting to integrate the work there. Out in Clan William in the Cederberg, Goed Gedacht in the Swartland, and here in Cape Town, the Lange Food Hub, the Goofy. Have you heard of Goofy?
I have, yes. Yeah. But do explain what Goofy is.
The Gugulethu Urban Food Forest Initiative, the Food Growers Initiative that came out of the Cairns movement. So firstly, a lot of action and a lot of really interesting bottom-up experimentation within the food system. So that's a good thing. But it's not just happening in civil society. Western Cape government has a very conscious and explicit food program called Nourish to Flourish, which combines a focus on the first 1,000 days and children under 5 and their mothers, and the nutrition angle with the food systems and linking it to production and not seeing it just as a social issue or just as an economic issue, but a sort of integrated governance approach. And they've mobilized 10 different departments within Western Cape government to try and get over the demon of siloism and mandatism and sort of parochialism within each department. And Western Cape government is doing an interesting thing. They're not just saying, well, let's have a few of our own projects on the ground, because that's a typical government approach. You put a budget together and you go and do your own projects. Western Cape government is explicitly saying, no, how do we support and enable bottom-up initiatives in communities, which is a refreshing approach, I certainly believe, from government. But City of Cape Town has a food systems program. The well-known Epping market, the Cape Town fresh produce market, it's getting an 80 million rand or 65 million rand upgrade of its facilities. And Africa, that market provides a very important role. The prices of fresh fruit and vegetables coming out of the Cape Town market, which is distributed mainly by 7,000 informal traders into poor and vulnerable areas, is 30% less than your big four supermarkets. So how do we support that as an antidote to the higher prices of the fresh food that we buy in the bigger supermarkets, and an antidote also to the highly processed, highly packaged, cheap but nutritionally useless food that is promoted relentlessly in poor and vulnerable communities. So the city is doing quite a lot. We were out in Philippi yesterday, and there's some really interesting urban food production skills development going on. There's incredible composting. I was told that Cape Town produces 7,000 tons of food waste every day, which goes into landfill. So how do we take at least half of that, divert it into, whether it's food recovery or composting? There's different ways of looking at these sort of things. The food dialogues run by the South African Food and Farming Trust is happening this week, and that's raising awareness. It's raising local voices in the food system, which is a good thing. And we are also blessed with some incredible researchers, food and nutrition system researchers, UWC, Stellenbosch, UCT. And I think for me, Africa, the question is, if we take this diversities of response, some in the top-down authorizing environment, some in the bottom-up mobilizing environment, some from the research community side, really excellent science being applied here, how do we bring all these initiatives together? So how are they all part of co-creating, rather than everyone working in their separate little silos and separate little campaigns and separate little programs? How do we not just co-create, as the slogan of this week from CDI, but also co-implement, in other words, to achieve collective impact? And what we're trying to do with the Western Cape Food Forum, which has a slogan of connect, communicate, and collaborate, and our focus is on local production for local consumption, shortening the food supply chain, focusing on physical proximity, but also social proximity, because food is also a cultural act. It's not just a physical act. Economic proximity. And I think that people are starting to coalesce around these new ideas in the food system. And ultimately, the question I would leave, we need a national conversation about this. Is food just a commodity to be sold like ball bearings or Wellington boots or umbrellas? Or is food really part of a common good, to be treated slightly differently from other products in our economic system?
See, that's a wonderfully philosophical question to ask, and I think one that is important to ask. A Gogo Dlamini in Philippi is worried about what am I going to be eating today, and her needs are more primary, right? Where am I going to get the protein to feed my child? Because all the literature tells me that protein is an essential element of the nutrition that needs to be fed. I read somewhere that an egg, simple egg, is probably one of the most nutritious sources of protein that you can find. And depending on which retailer you go to, you pay an extraordinary amount of money for what I think is a readily available product, isn't it?
It's available in a generic sense. It's not available to people who cannot afford it. And it's also when people are faced with a choice of something that's cheaper, but it's processed and highly packaged and highly attractive to the children that are with you, that you want to feed, it creates a very distorted playing field.
We won't go into the parenting question because I'm the adult, I'm telling what you're going to eat and this is good for you, so eat it. But I imagine, Petrina, that you resonate a lot with what Andrew has shared, right? There are, and Andrew, thank you very much for highlighting that there are good things happening in this space. Some of them are beginning to work together, but clearly not enough yet for us to see a critical mass difference, if you like, in the issue of malnutrition and hunger in this country.
No, definitely. There's definitely not enough that is happening, and we are definitely going to have to step up our game. And as Andrew said, it is not something that only one department is able to spearhead. There's going to have to be a collaboration across different government departments, hand in hand with civil society, because we know that civil society is required because we are on the ground. We know where the poverty nodules are. We know who the people are that are the greatest in need, but also the people who can assist us to do the implementation. So government needs to be working with civil society to be addressing it. And we need to have the departments of finance and economics unlocking the funds in order for this to happen.
A question coming from the platform, and please do use the chat function, of course, to ask those questions. For you, Petrina, have schools been more receptive to starting food gardens since the COVID crisis? And do they allow NGOs to come in and to help manage them, run them?
Schools are very open to having NGOs come in to help them to run it, because they themselves, one, do not have the resources to be managing the school gardens. Caretakers of the schools don't have the time always to be working in it. And while funders come in and they just do the initial setup, you need those gardens to remain sustainable. And so they need the support of NGOs to support them to ensure the sustainability and the continuity of the gardens. The schools will definitely be open to having that happen, and PSFA has definitely worked along some NGOs who have been showing a willingness, like Sprightly Seeds and others, to come in and work in school gardens.
No, for sure. Can we get a microphone to Lindie, please, who's sitting in the audience? Lindie, I want your reaction to many of the conversations and the detail that has been shared so far. Schools are receptive to the idea of NGOs coming in to help them with food gardens, and that will help address the locally produced for local consumption and minimizing waste, which obviously you highlighted in your presentation.
You often, from a business perspective, is it on?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. From a business perspective, we see initiatives running in silos. Where business wants to get involved. You mentioned the Cape Town market. Big growers, for instance, right through to small growers, have access to supplying to that market. You have access, for instance, NGOs, you've got feeding schemes, right through to retail, retail, buying at the market. It's like a connection point. Like you created that market, you can also create collaborative actions. Collaborative actions to connect business. I'm fascinated by how civil society came on board, providing 60% of the initiative and 40% from government. We tend to stand buckhunt, and we want government to do everything for us. But if we design, in the context of this whole program, collaborative platforms, for business to get involved, for NGOs to be part of the process, designing, because they work with civil society, they work with the beneficiaries. Like in your case, you work with the children. You've done the research, you know exactly what's needed. Business got a product, a grower, avocado grower in my reference. They've got a product they want to sell. They don't know how much a child needs of that nutritional value. They don't know how many children there are. They don't know how to connect those dots. They sell their product. We need a collaborative platform for all these initiatives, government support, the logistical side of things, the enabling side of things, the marketing. We talk of parents that, yes, they might have that 10 Rand to spend, but they don't know where to spend that money to have a nutritional plate there that might fall in that 10 Rand, I don't know. And that platform can create that education as well as enable that mother to buy that food or add to what the kid is getting from school, add to the fresh element, for instance, or what is necessary to be eaten before they go to bed, which they don't get at school, that sort of thing. So that's one thing that keeps on coming in my head while I'm listening to all of this is we need to connect these dots. We need to find a collaborative platform.
I imagine the ultimate goal would be to empower the households sufficiently that they're not only reliant on a plate of food being delivered either in a schooling environment for the child or through the incredible work done by civil society in food relief over COVID-19. Every parent and head of a household wants the dignity of being able to provide their own food to their family. That is the ultimate goal, isn't it?
Yes, of course. We always say that the cheapest food is unaffordable if you don't have an income, and that adds to that dignity. The basis here is to have people participate, not just in the economy, but in civil society, in the broader sense of what we're doing to make a society work. There's economic part, there's education part, all of that. People need that dignity of participating, and that is a part of that is also raising your children, So the dignity of being able to look after your children. And you can even get into the psychological things here. I think Andrew mentioned it. It even adds to crime, at the end of the day. So if you can bring back that system of dignity because you're part of something. And the dependency syndrome is a very big problem in our country. We depend on the school to give our kids school. We depend on government to fix a pothole. We depend on the retailer to make food more affordable. No, we need to participate. So dignity and participation, sense of belonging, that's the mentality that we need to create to solve these solutions. And I really believe all the role players want to be a part of this. Back to my topic that I introduced there of the food waste problem that we have. None of us want to see food getting wasted. None of us want to, from a business perspective, want to see that we've applied all this energy, water, labor, value, all of it to a product that doesn't end up to the consumer that we want to sell it to. And if we all go back to our core intentions and really participate, this can be solved.
Indeed. With the amount of sun drying that one can do and a blender that you can use to paste something, there should never be any food wastage, I tell you. Karin, let me bring you in here because Solidaridad is promoting that concept of rural farm, urban eat. And I imagine that in your work around transformation of the agricultural process and the initiatives that you are supporting in urban areas, a lot of that would help to address many of the concepts that we're discussing now, wouldn't it?
Indeed. Well, firstly, we don't really only promote rural produce, urban eat. There's a lot of urban food gardening projects in the region, and we see it increasingly in South Africa and around in and around Cape Town, and it can really be effectively used as a vehicle of what I would call a vehicle for broader societal change. So in many urban areas, food gardens have become very critical to food security, despite the public, and I think Andrew mentioned that, Petrina mentioned that, despite public and private policy environment that favors a complex route of food from commercial agriculture to retail supply chains. We've seen that, with food gardens, for many low-income households have access to healthier food. It's allowing them, even in very small measures, but it's allowing them to get access to food that is a bit more affordable to purchase. It is also inspiring to see among low-income gardeners that there's a set of food values related to knowledge, to control, to trust, freshness, environmentally sound production methods and sharing that is emerging, which they are able to enact through gardening. So many farmers, just a stone throw away from where you all are now, are practicing organic, agroecological, and regenerative farming practices. We also take our inspiration in our work from, for instance, different approaches. We are increasingly seeing farming communities development are developing, or community-based agriculture, or what we would call community-driven food production. These are approaches that really highlights the importance that low-income gardeners place on having food that aligns with their cultural and ethical values, and being able to exercise greater autonomy in making food choices. And we see through this the demonstration of nutritional contributions that food gardens are making to many urban as well as rural households.
The Central Methodist Mission, which is a church in Greenmarket Square in Cape Town, started this wonderful initiative of using the space just outside the church as public gardens. And they would plant vegetables, and literally anyone and everyone, but particularly the homeless, was welcome to harvest and pick food that they can go and cook where they have opportunities to cook it. Obviously, COVID-19 scuppered that, and now it's all spepworm, which in itself is an important plant and certainly of use, and some nutrition, I think, can be derived from that. But there was a time when you could pick spinach, when you could pick carrots, when you could pick healthy food that has very minimal chemical sort of interventions in it, that would be nutritious to the people who would obviously pick the food. Is this something that we could look to expand, I don't know, urban citywide, where there's almost a moral obligation, if you have the space, make it available for a public garden so that people who need vegetables can gain access to it?
I absolutely think so. I think everybody now knows about the cabbage bandit, which is really making national headlines just because he decided to grow a food garden in front, on a sidewalk. But you see these kinds of approaches in many other parts of the world. In my community where I live, we have recently started planting gardens with learners from schools. And, it feeds the school, it sources, this is a source of supply to the school feeding facility. The youngsters are picking fresh vegetables that they can take home. And what they can't use or sell or take home goes into the feeding facility that feeds them over weekends. But increasingly, and we are partnering with a number of local organizations. We are setting up household food gardens. We are doing gardens in vertical gardens. We are doing just planting seedlings in very small patches, or we are bringing people together on bigger pieces of land. So individuals, but we generate or create that enabling environment for them to grow seasonal vegetables that they can use, firstly, to feed their own families, but also to share that with the community. So I think these are the kinds of things, and Andrew put it very eloquently, that, we really need to look at these local initiatives that are sort of starting without any real support, but it is certainly having a very significant influence in terms of food security. So, I really think we just need a mind shift in terms of how we look at food, and not always look at food, as going to a shop and taking it off a shelf. That food is not growing, growing on that shelf. You can really, any person that has got a small space of land and really thinks about the importance of making sure that I feed my family, can grow food, and that is possible. I think we really need to see how can we support those kinds of household gardens, the school gardens that Petrina referred to, but also, there's a lot of dumping spaces in informal settlements where you can very easily, if you clear the land, you can create a community food garden, and those are the kinds of things that I think we need to promote, encourage, and also support.
No, for sure. Andrew, we are 40 days away from the local government election. Politicians are going to be vying for our votes. Should we make the issue of food security an essential part? So if a manifesto does not spend a significant amount of time coming up with concrete, measurable ideas of how we address this issue, we should make it an issue, shouldn't we?
Well, I think any candidate who doesn't support making every unused bit of land in our city or town a potential food garden shouldn't be voted for. But can I add two things there?
Of course. You can tweet that, by the way. That's tweetable. That's a tweetable statement just there.
We've got to take it one step further. It's not just firstly, on the land issue, government, including municipalities, gets into a groot toestand every time they try and transact with informality. Government systems are so, in a sense, over-regulated and over-compliant. And if you're dealing with a municipal asset like land, and you want to transfer it into a lease of a community group, if they are not registered, if they're not on a supplier database, and they're not compliant, Petrina, you know the story, government, including local government, simply cannot transact easily. So you've got to put in place, I think in the short term, a system of intermediaries that are robust enough to transact with the over-formalized government system, but have very good connections to the informal, whether it's unregistered ECDs or a community garden or a community kitchen. None of those are formalized structures. But most of our developmental efforts in communities are not formalized. They are not registered. So how does government deal better? And so that is a question I would put to all candidates. How are you going to solve that one? And the second question I'd put to them, it's not just about the making land available. You've got to make it the issue of water. Where does water come from? And the fact that 21 of our rivers in Cape Town are polluted. The flays are all polluted. So we can't use the water that is all around us. And in the hot, dry summer months in Cape Town, to sustain food gardens, very hard. Secondly, where do the seeds come from? And thirdly, how do we improve the nutrition of the soil? Because, and it can be done, but you need quite a lot of techniques, supportive techniques to help people turn quite barren, sandy soil that is windblown in summer into something productive. So I would add all those to part of the mix. Who's coming up with solutions from a municipal level in the forthcoming elections to support the system of growing food wherever there's unused land?
Without mentioning any political parties, because, well, they haven't paid us to plug them, are you seeing evidence of that? Are you seeing candidates, political party organizations that are thinking in that space?
Unfortunately not. Most people at the municipal level still in the paradigm is food production or food system improvement or nutrition. It's not our mandate. It's an unfunded mandate, and we're not going to do it. Otherwise, the Auditor General will lay into us. Very legalistic and mechanistic approach to trying to change and improve the food and nutrition system.
All right. Karin, we've got a question for you from the platform. How can we support small-scale farmers in making them part of the food security solution?
Well, I think important. One of the things that we know that most small-scale farmers are struggling with is the lack of resources. Firstly, to farm. Secondly, just to improve their capabilities and capacities to produce in a more sustainable manner. We have been working with smallholder farmers in various commodity chains, but also farmers that are operating outside of these commodity chains. So we put a lot of effort in terms of our project implementation in ensuring that farmers, that we instill some of these good practices in farmers, that we are seeing the yields, better yields, that they are, and of better quality, of course. And then to make sure that we help and facilitate access to resources, such as inputs, such as financial or capital resources. But I think, we really need to look at our policy environment. I think there's so many disconnected dots when it comes to how do we support smallholder farmers and how do we get them into mainstream agriculture. But besides that, I think they do play a very significant role. So what we've done now is to provide customized services through social enterprises that we have established in various parts of the region that provide these customized services to smallholder farmers, improve and build their capacity to grow better, and also to get the products to a quality we can actually go into a more formalized supply chain where they can get a better price for the product.
I'm going to finish off with a lovely story involving my nephew who's turning 8 next month. He came to my apartment over the weekend, opened my fridge and said, "Puti, are you starving?" I went, "No, why?" Because my fridge was not filled to the brim with food, because otherwise it will go to waste. I'm one of those people who's lucky enough to be able to go and purchase what I need for that day or for the next 2 or 3 days. Ultimately, it becomes expensive in the long run. Petrina referenced the advantage of bulk buying, which is something that I can't take. There are certain things you can store in the deep freezer, right? And there are things that are flour, mini meal, that kind of thing that you can buy in bulk because that stays forever. But fruits and vegetables, meat, fish, chicken, that you almost need to buy whenever you want to. And I wish that all of South Africa had not necessarily the economic means to do that, because of course we do wish it, but I wish we had a design system that allows for us to consume what we need when we need it, so that we minimize the amount of waste, so that we don't have obese children, both because of bad food that they're eating or overconsumption of food, but that we remember that is literally the size of our stomach, and we do not need to consume more than what we need to do. He did say, "I'll just have a glass of water, please, because my teacher said drinking all these bad sugary drinks is bad for you." And I learned yesterday that 9 to 10-year-olds on average drink up to 254 cans of soda every year. 254 cans of soda every year. That cannot be. That just cannot be. But as I said, that's a very different parenting conversation. Let me say thank you very much to all of my guests today. Andrew Boraine, the CEO of the Western Cape Economic Development Partnership, Lindie Stroebel, the Southern Africa Country Manager at Mission Produce, Karin Kleinbooi, Senior Program Manager at Solidaridad Southern Africa, and Petrina Pakoe, who is with the Peninsula School Feeding Association. You really all have given us some food for thought. Thank you very much. I'll ask you to make space. making space, of course, for Sebastiaan, who's the Consul General for the Dutch Consulate right here in Cape Town, who's been with Co-Create Design Festival for many, many years now. Not him specifically, but the Consulate. And of course, Erica Alk, who's head of the Craft and Design Institute. Food for thought, literally, Sebastiaan. I mean, we've been fed a lot of, I think, good ideas.
Yes.
Regarding what needs to be done in this space.
Yes, and to take your analogy a bit further, I'm hungry for the practical execution of it, because I heard a lot of things that some of them were new, some of them were kind of expected, especially after yesterday and the day before, that you have the underlying causes in South African society where poverty hits everything. Poverty hits literally everything, so that's really an underlying cause that's hard to deal with, but you have to address it. I really liked the thinking of from the seed to the mouth, where's the waste going and how can you bring that back? My question in that one is, how do you monetize waste? We haven't talked about it. Can you incentivize the reduction of waste like we've done with clean air and polluting air, where we're dealing with emission rights? Can you monetize waste in a way that it becomes less beneficial to have waste for companies? I, of course, come from a neoliberal market economy. I think, how can you force businesses to make profit out of not being harmful? That's a question I think that we need to...
Whereas my approach is punitive tax measures.
That's why I'm adding this.
we literally saw, I made reference to the sugary sort of sugar tax that was introduced in 2018. We've seen a 28% reduction in a number of sugar product, basically, that is consumed in South Africa.
And personally, I think you need to do both. Punitive only doesn't change the mindset. It changes behavior for somewhat, but it doesn't change the mindset. I think you need to do both. The third thing that struck me as well is what I really liked by all the speakers, and I think Andrew Boraine stressed it the most, is you need really a whole society approach here. And Linda Stroebel saying, well, let's have these collaborative platforms. Well, let's have them. I agree totally. Let's have them. Who's gonna start doing this? How's it gonna be organized? We need to start thinking then about what steps are involved to get there, and are people passionate enough to say, okay, it might not be totally my job description, but you know what? I'm going to put some thoughts to this, write it down, and see whether I can gather people around this idea, which is really necessary to happen. I totally agree. So yeah, maybe I'm a little bit more critical space today. I woke up with it this morning. I'm sorry, I apologize for it. But and then another thing that I am very interested in, but we didn't really touch upon today, is the role of technology. In the food production, so much is gained by newer technologies that are more sustainable these days. And I pride my own society because we're living on such a small space in the Netherlands. We're the size of the Western Cape with 17 million people. So we have to be highly efficient to make things work. So I pride that my society businesses come up with ideas to make things really efficient. Can we see whether we can collaborate with South African society, see what the solutions are here, how we can learn from each other and improve both sides? That's technology. We didn't really address it today. I think we need to dig into that deeper.
And it's quite essential. I mean, we might have the landmass that we do in South Africa, but the overwhelming majority of that landmass is sitting in desert. Exactly. Where the ability to grow something is difficult. Andrew made reference to it. A lot of the communities in Cape Town live in the Cape Flats, and that's sad. Yeah. That has no nutritional value for anything that you need to grow. Therefore, you have to, at times, use technology and innovation to bring nutritious elements for whatever you're going to be planting in that space.
So I think we need to look at that too, technology. It's important. But again, impressed. I mean, so many angles, so many good ideas. I'm looking forward to the resolve challenge that you're going to organize.
Erica, what were some of your main takeaways? Up.
Okay, it's on. Sure. So I mean, I've made some notes. Let me try and refer to them. So I think the one key thing sort of stand out for me is obviously that the kind of access to affordable, nutritious food has got to be the mantra that we all are trying to solve for. And the other sort of big takeout that for me was around the need for information and education and knowledge. And so that's something that was in my mind was going on. That's something where technology might be an enabler, because if we think about how dependent we all are on these things, and if this could be a way of distributing information in accessible ways to people, so maybe there's solutions there. Tying that into this, I think the other sort of thought I had is that maybe this is one area where we all actually have agency. We can, even if it is just growing a pot of spinach or something in a small space, we can make, individuals can actually have agency and make a difference. It's about knowledge and obviously access to the inputs, etc. But there are this. I mean, I think Andrew's referred to it, the sort of wealth of people on the ground, the ECDs, the feeding schemes, the food gardens, doing stuff. So also, how do we use technology to aggregate that effort, but also in a way that brings in individuals and citizens? So it's like is there a mass platform that could tick all of those boxes?
And it's quite interesting because yes, we need to tick all of those boxes and we need to do all those things, yet South Africa actually produces enough food. If you think about it, I mean, 10 million tons of food wasted, an extraordinary amount of food that goes into pits, basically, in Cape Town on a daily basis. There's enough food for everybody. It's just not distributed in a way that is equitable or just, for that matter.
Yeah. I mean, I think that is obviously that's the nub of it. But I think the sort of, I guess, the strands of the conversation on Monday and yesterday and now today is, I guess, it's that the dichotomy that we have in South Africa between the large, formal, regulated, structured, and the informal, the decentralized, the small. And I think that's where we kind of have to get the system to open up, to allow for the development of that and the inclusion of informal and small as part of the solution.
Actually, also when I talked to our city colleague Gareth Morgan, who was in the resilience space in the city of Cape Town, also says the informal economy is actually where your resilience sits. Where really, when things go pear-shaped, the informal economy helps people survive. And also, I think it was Karin Kleinbooi also said today, like the smaller farmer. How do you, and in informal markets, how do you connect those to the bigger problems? And yeah, you have a point there. I agree. And
that 10% contribution to gas emissions is not coming from the informal market. No. It's coming from very much the formalized processes of managing food. We are going to the Cape Town market. I think it's the oldest in the country. What are we going to be doing there?
So the site visit, is to the Epping food market. We're going to have a look at the system and how it works. I mean, I think some of the information that came out today, it's extraordinary that we have this gem that actually works. So how do we amplify that? How do we make sure that more people know about it, but also that maybe it gets replicated in some way? I don't know. And then this afternoon, we're back into our design thinking workshops, more food for thought for the innovators and social entrepreneurs. But I think, what I'm wanting us to do in this process is also try to focus some of the challenge thinking more.
Yeah.
And on this one, I'm wondering whether our focus also shouldn't be on children. I think the information that Petrina shared with us, that, you know, that's potentially devastating. It's devastating now, but it's also devastating in the future. So can we focus our minds on how do we support nutritious, accessible, affordable food to children?
Can I suggest for people that are online and not being able to go to these workshops this afternoon, the Craft and Design Institute and also Co-Create SANL, we've been tweeting today, yesterday, day before, giving you the highlights of things that are being said. But it would really be great if you're out there and you can't be here physically to take that discussion on Twitter further and see whether we can exchange some ideas that could potentially feed into the workshop this afternoon as well. So I really hope that people will go into the Twitter accounts of Craft and Design Institute or Co-Create SANL and just use that reply button to throw in the ideas that you can take this afternoon.
Today also happens to be officially the spring equinox in the Southern Hemisphere. So it's Spring Day, not the 1st of September, as many people celebrate. But with spring comes new growth and new life. And I think let's use this opportunity and this day to really come up with some fantastic solutions to bring new life to South Africa. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. You will be able to obviously click on the link for you to join the virtual tour of the Cape Town market. It's the oldest and the largest fresh produce market, more than 50 years old, servicing 5,500 producers, delivering fresh produce to our market agents, who in turn sell the fresh produce to over 8,000 registered buyers. And then, as Erica said, the Resolve Ideation Challenge is going to happen both in this space physically as well as online. And we hope you'll be able to focus really on addressing that issue of child nutrition. If we don't get that right, what did the president say? Alleviating hunger is not an act of charity. There's a constitutional obligation and a moral obligation to all of us to address this. We'll see you again tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock on this platform as we tackle the issue of water and sanitation. Have a wonderful Wednesday.